Deep in the limestone caves of Europe and Asia, beneath layers of soil and ice, lie the bones of a people who were once our closest relatives, the Neanderthals. For over a century and a half, they've been painted in shifting roles, sometimes brutish hunters with clubs, sometimes tragic figures standing at the edge of extinction. But today, the story is changing. Thanks to ancient DNA, we're beginning to uncover not just how they vanished, but where they truly came from. For decades, scientists debated Neanderthal origins. Their remains stretch from the rocky shelters of Spain to the frozen steppes of Siberia, dating back hundreds of thousands of years. But while their bones tell us where they lived, their DNA carries hints of an even deeper story, one that begins long before Europe became their homeland. A recent wave of studies, led by international teams of geneticists and paleoanthropologists, has pieced together DNA from fossils across the continent. Sites like Vindija Cave in Croatia, Cima de los Huesos in Spain, and even the remote Alai Mountains of Siberia have all contributed genetic clues. When combined, these fragments reveal a history shaped by migrations, climate swings, and encounters with other ancient humans. The genetic trail leads back about 600,000 years, when Neanderthals and modern humans split from a shared ancestor, likely Homo heidelbergensis. For years, scientists thought that ancestors' descendants in Europe gradually evolved into Neanderthals. But DNA tells a more complicated tale. Early Neanderthals carried traces of a much older lineage, possibly rooted further east, in Central or East Asia. In other words, the birthplace of Neanderthals may not have been Europe at all, but a vast region stretching thousands of miles. One of the most important discoveries came from the Altai Mountains of Siberia. There, researchers sequenced the DNA of a female Neanderthal who lived more than 120,000 years ago. Her genome contained evidence of interbreeding with Denisovans, another mysterious group of humans who lived in Asia. This showed that Neanderthals weren't a single, isolated population. They were part of a broader network of ancient humans who exchanged genes and ideas across continents. Even within Europe, not all Neanderthals were the same. Fossils from Spain's Cima de los Huesos, dated to over 430,000 years ago, revealed genetic differences from their eastern cousins in Siberia. Instead of one continuous population, there may have been multiple waves of Neanderthals moving into Europe, sometimes mixing, sometimes replacing each other. The result was a complex family tree, more like a braided river than a straight line. So why were they moving? Climate likely played a major role. During the Ice Age, glaciers expanded and retreated over and over again. Populations were forced south into warmer refuges, then pushed north again when the climate warmed. These shifts may have brought Neanderthals into contact with distant groups, including the ancestors of modern humans, far earlier than anyone expected. And the DNA revealed something else, faint traces of genes that may have come from even older hominins, such as Homo erectus. This suggests that Neanderthals' roots stretched back through deep time in Asia, linking them to populations that had spread out of Africa nearly 2 million years ago. Together, these findings overturn the old idea of Neanderthals as a purely European people. Their true origins seem to be scattered across a massive territory, shaped by migration, climate change, and interbreeding with other human species. This broader perspective also changes how we imagine them. Instead of picturing Neanderthals as frozen in a single place, we can now see them as wanderers, shaped by journeys that crossed continents. They weren't passive figures waiting in caves. They were active participants in a constantly shifting prehistoric world. The landscapes they moved through, from icy tundras to temperate forests, tested their resilience and forged their identity. The picture becomes even clearer when we look at specific sites. One of the most revealing is Mezmaitskaya Cave in the Caucasus Mountains. This rugged region lies between Europe and Asia, a natural corridor where populations could move and mix. In this cave, scientists uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal child who lived more than 40,000 years ago. Her DNA carried genetic connections to Eastern populations, reinforcing the idea that the Caucasus acted as a bridge, not a barrier, between worlds. This pattern shows that Neanderthals were not static. Between about 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, they expanded and re-expanded into different regions multiple times. Each wave left subtle genetic differences, like edits in a book. These movements also created opportunities for contact with other humans. We often think of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals happening around 60,000 years ago, when our species began leaving Africa. But DNA evidence suggests that encounters happened much earlier too, possibly over 200,000 years ago. That means modern human ancestors and Neanderthals may have exchanged genes in multiple waves, long before the final migration that spread our species across the globe. This reshapes the way we see our family tree. Instead of neat branches splitting cleanly, it looks more like a web. Lines crossing, separating, and reconnecting over hundreds of thousands of years. And Neanderthals were active players in that web. The Altai Neanderthal, for example, proved that contact with Denisovans was not rare, but repeated. Their DNA carries traces of shared ancestry and occasional interbreeding, showing that these groups overlapped for long stretches of time. In fact, one fossil even belonged to a child who had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, a literal first-generation hybrid. These discoveries highlight just how connected Ice Age populations really were. But the question remains: if they were adaptable travelers, skilled hunters, and capable of surviving Ice Age Europe for so long, why did they eventually disappear? The answer lies partly in the same DNA that told us about their origins. By the final chapters of their existence, Neanderthal populations were shrinking. Their genomes show long stretches of identical DNA, signs of inbreeding. This reduced genetic diversity and made them more vulnerable to disease and environmental stress. At the same time, modern humans were expanding with larger groups, wider social networks, and more flexible technologies. When the two species overlapped in Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals were already at a disadvantage. They weren't less intelligent, but their smaller, scattered populations made them fragile in a way that modern humans were not. It's also possible that diseases spread by modern humans, or by other animals that traveled with them, hit Neanderthal populations especially hard. Small groups simply don't have the resilience to withstand new epidemics. Even if the death toll wasn't massive, it would have weakened them further, making recovery nearly impossible. Another factor may have been resources. Modern humans could form trade networks, exchange ideas, and move knowledge across vast distances. This gave them an advantage in difficult times. Neanderthals, in contrast, were often stuck with whatever resources existed in their immediate environment. If those resources disappeared, their survival chances dropped sharply. Even so, Neanderthals didn't vanish without leaving a trace. Every person outside of Africa today carries between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. That inheritance affects us in ways both small and surprising. It shapes our immune systems, influences our skin and hair, and even alters how our bodies respond to sunlight. In that sense, Neanderthals are still with us, woven into our biology. And the more we study ancient DNA, the more their story expands. New techniques can now detect Neanderthal genetic material even in cave sediments, long after bones have decayed. Other studies are analyzing microscopic traces on stone tools or in the hardened plaque of fossilized teeth. Each discovery adds another layer to their story, showing just how interconnected their world was. What's emerging is a picture of Neanderthals as travelers, innovators, and survivors. They weren't simply trapped in Europe, waiting for modern humans to arrive. They moved, adapted, and interacted across vast landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. Their origin wasn't a single point on a map, but a network of journeys stretching across continents. Their extinction, then, wasn't a sign of failure. It was the outcome of small populations facing enormous pressures, climate swings, disease, and competition with expanding modern humans. Yet their legacy endures in us. This is why studying Neanderthals matters. It isn't just about dusty bones or forgotten caves. It's about understanding how humans survive, adapt, and sometimes vanish. Neanderthals lasted over 300,000 years, far longer than our own species has existed so far. That alone shows they were remarkably successful. Their disappearance is not a story of weakness, but of how fragile even the strongest species can be when numbers run too low. And as technology advances, the picture will only sharpen. Already, researchers are uncovering new Neanderthal DNA from unexpected places: sediments, tools, even the tartar on ancient teeth. Each piece of evidence brings them back into focus, reminding us that they were not an evolutionary dead end, but a branch of humanity, with a legacy that still flows through us. When we think of them, it's easy to imagine a small group huddled in a cold cave, struggling to survive. But we should also picture their resilience, communities that endured brutal winters, crossed mountain ranges, and adapted to shifting landscapes for hundreds of millennia. Their story is not one of failure, but of endurance against the odds. To understand Neanderthals is to understand ourselves. Every strand of DNA that connects us to them is a reminder of shared struggles, shared triumphs, and a shared history written across continents. They lived, loved, hunted, and created, just as we do. And though their voices are gone, their legacy remains in us. In every heartbeat, in every gene, in every story we tell about who we are. And one thing that scientists have finally learned through DNA research is how Neanderthals become so strong. And if you click the video on the screen, you will learn the reason.